Hello everyone, Reza here, welcome to my channel. I recently made a two-part tutorial covering the Modeling Toolkit in Unreal Engine, breaking down what each tool does. However, we haven't had the opportunity to use these tools in a practical setting. So I decided to create a short tutorial to demonstrate how to model a basic CCTV camera using Unreal Engine modeling features. Let's dive right in. We're going to start by loading the plugin, Modeling Toolkit. It's there. I'm going to get rid of some unwanted elements and tap into my reference. We can see there are a variety of designs, round, cubic, with screws on the side, different shapes for the cover. Looks quite interesting. We may combine some of these ideas. This one has got wiper. That's quite an overkill in my opinion, and a few latches on the side. This one I actually quite like, so I may get my design as close as possible to this one. Multi-layered cover, looks quite elegant. And of course, cables, the way that they hooked up to the wall or pole. Starting with the main design, at this point I'm not too precious about the exact measurements. I'm blocking out all the main bits and pieces. I put some initial resolution, polygroup mode to per face using static design, and of course right after creating anything I will rename it through the outliner. We don't want things to pile up, we want to stay organized. Model polygroup edit and select these two edges and bevel them to get closer to the design that we just looked at. Selecting the top polygroups, lower it down. Polygroup edit, I'm going to do a quick inset and doing an extrusion to push this back ever so slightly. I want this piece to be the glass as well in front of the visor or the lens, so I'm going to select that and separate that. So we have that as a separate mesh. We can assign, let's say, a different material to it. I'm going to rename that as well, call that glass. I'm going to hide it for now, and we are going to duplicate, keep input, the main body, and that's going to serve as our internal structure. Obviously there's a hole right in the middle, so mesh, fill hole, and delete some unwanted polygroups through polygroup edit and push that back in. I need to rename that as well. So SM for static mesh, cam, body, back, face. I feel like I'm not really seeing much, so I'm going to change the direction of the light, trying out a few cube maps in my skylight, so get some indirect lights in as well. Not everything is pitch black. Fixing the field of view, and I'm going to go into polygon extrude and create a ring. Of course you can do that with just a simple generate cylinder as well, and boolean the middle. But again, I'm trying to experiment with the variety of the tools, not to stay within one tool and rinse and repeat, just a bit of an experiment. And to be honest with you, this plugin is not close to some of the apps that you may use. So you kind of need to think about, all right, what options do I have, and utilize them. I'm using plane cut in the model category to create the lens, and I'm thinking about the fact that maybe one lens may not do the trick. Of course, these cameras have multiple lenses, and while we don't reveal the internal structure, we want to sort of give the audience the illusion that there are not just, there are multiple lenses in there. So I may duplicate that, rename the secondary lens, I'm going to call that inner, and shrink that ever so slightly Although in real life that is technically inaccurate. Those lenses are not that small. I'm trying to fake the result. So name that again, ring, and put lights into its group so they're not in the way, and removing the bits that I don't want. Now playing around with the measurements, still getting a feel for what it looks like, how it could work for me. Moving into cover, I'm going to duplicate this main body twice. The first layer underneath cover and the top cover, and experimenting with plane cut. Although it works, I'm getting some hollow faces, and I don't want to constantly feel hold on some of these areas, as you can see. So while this is workable, another alternative is to do a quick boolean. So utilizing what I already have, duplicating it, moving it up, reposition it, scaling it, and it's just a simple A over B in model boolean. And because the polygroups are per face, at any point of time I can select the unwanted faces and just press delete on them. Simple as that. So delete here, here, or even around the edges. We are going to offset them, so I don't need these guys as well. Let's get rid of them. I'm pretty much going to do the same thing for the bottom one. So I'm going to go into Xform, duplicate, increase the target size, reposition it. And the good thing about that is with Boolean, it's live, so you can actually interactively even change the result after the implementation, like so, and delete the unwanted polygroups. Very, very straightforward. Okay, let's bring them into position after rescaling them ever so slightly. And let's see how they look. I may need to just fix the proportion ever so slightly. I'm not too happy with how long this camera is at the moment. Mesh, triangle, edit. Let's give it a little bit of design. Push some of these points back. And for the corners of this one right here, I might actually bevel them. So model, polygroup, edit. And I'm going to do a quick offset to give it thickness. And with that, I can bevel the corners now. So let's go polygroup, edit, select the edges and go bevel, increase the subdivision so things are not looking too faceted, increasing the distance and get a round shape. Moving these guys back, doing another round of offset to extrude the geometry out to give it thickness. And I'm still thinking about how can I improve the proportion. Looking at the reference, the overall length of the camera is a bit shorter. I may go with that actually. So selecting everything and adjusting the scale in Y-axis ever so slightly. And of course, renaming the elements that I just created. Now that's done, let's go and convert each side into its polygroup through mesh, select triangles, create polygroup. So if there's any modification needed at the end, I can easily put that into practice. Done. So each face or each side is a separate polygroup. I'm not going to use it now, but you never know. So make use of the power of polygroups in there and try to be organized and predict what you may use with polygroups. I noticed that there is a gap in here, so I might actually extrude this area forward a little bit and close that gap ever so slightly between the body and the internal structure. Okay, the gap is closed. What's next? Let's bring the simple sphere and that's going to be the recording, some sort of a lamp or button or whatever you want to call it. I didn't see that on every single camera, but I thought it would be a good idea to just give it a bit of a design. I'm going to bring a simple torus as like a ring around the recording indicator or the lamp using orthographic views. I want to make sure that what I'm doing is correct, centralizing the objects, fixing its pivots, and taking it from there. Using plane cut to get rid of the unwanted topology. Although we're using nanite, still it's a good practice to think about optimization. Rescaling this ever so slightly, bring the lamp into position, and of course, rename the elements. All right, what's next? I was thinking that, okay, it would be a good idea to put 4 screws in 4 corners. And while I can just use a hemisphere like so, I thought to myself, well, let's give it a little bit of a design. And I may actually go into orthographic and create just a simple box and do a quick Boolean to give the screw a little bit of personality or design, if I may. So rotating it 90 axis, have a sort of a plus looking icon, so I can just Boolean that out of my existing screw, like so. That should do the trick from the distance. There's no close-up shot, so not too much detailing is needed on this bit. Simply Xform, duplicate, and just scatter this around. I've got 2 more to duplicate. That's the lower one, and that's the upper one, and that should do the trick. For the cover, I may go into plane cut and create an external one using duplicate, plane cut, and create an addition like a rim or extension at the end of the cover, just to give it a little bit of design. I don't want that to be too boring. Some of these references are just too flat with not much detail. That's an excuse to create an additional detail in there. All right, let's go and block out the base. Usually goes towards the rear of the camera. So simple cube using the power of polygons, polyedit group. I'm just going to remove some unwanted ones. Go into mesh, triangle edit, and pull some verts. Give it more of a design. I may want to create a hole in there, but before I do that, I'm going to offset it first. And then let's create a hole for the screw. We can do that using a simple Boolean again. So model, Boolean, and done. Now I have a little bit of difficulty seeing what's going on. Maybe I shouldn't have deleted the skylight, but let's keep going. I'm going to copy one of the screws and position that in there, just using orthographic views constantly to make sure I'm not guessing anything. Unlit. Also, I noticed that this grid is not really giving me much. While I'm renaming, I'm constantly thinking, let's just put some default materials the exact same design. I don't need to do one thing twice. Centralize it. Looks good. Let's duplicate that and create just a little bit of detailing. Place that right in the middle as our connector. Give it a different material so I can actually see it. Sometimes it's pretty difficult to see some of these things. Now let's bring in a cylinder as the base. I'm going to use orthographic to resize. Lower it down. Fix the lighting ever so slightly so I can see what I'm doing. Rescale. And what I'm thinking is also to do another round of Boolean. So duplicate it, create a Boolean, so carve out a bit from the cylinder so everything goes in nicely. So not everything is intersecting. It's pretty powerful, this Boolean tool, and I do use it a lot. So going to Model, Offset, and then Extrude to create the base. And again, Inset and Extrude through Model, Polygroup Edit. Now that bit is done, let's create a simple rectangle and create some sort of a connector. So this pole is going to connect the camera to the wall. I'm still figuring out how long this should be, constantly looking at the references in my second monitor just to make sure that it looks correct. Creating a hole to begin with and resizing this connector ever so slightly and push that in. Now I'm going to go to Deform, Lattice, reduce the resolution and taper the end of it. So it's more of a cone shape. And with that, I can even resize it as well. So Deform, Lattice, pretty powerful. And again, at the end, creating a plate, reposition it through orthographic. And once that's done, I'm ready to rename all the elements that I just created. So as you can see, it's fairly straightforward. Oftentimes people say that it's difficult to model in Unreal Engine. I think it's not difficult, it's just different. And you will get used to it once you model a prop or two, and it kind of becomes second nature. Let's bring the plate forward. I tapered the sides ever so slightly, making sure that's been centralized. And of course, once that's done, the fun bit, renaming the objects that you made. And this step is important to do that right after creation. Otherwise, you can't really tell which one is which, and it becomes actually quite time consuming. So renaming the hinge, renaming the bracket, so on and so forth. Cool. Again, trying different bits and pieces, different materials, default materials for me to see things better. And apparently this one is doing the trick. Just a simple plastic looking material, getting the job done. Now I'm creating a cylinder, give it tons of subdivision. I've seen in some of the references that there is a cable, while some of these guys are wireless or cable-less. I'm going to use a modifier, so deform, warp, bend to create some sort of a cable, bring it into a position, and I can decide whether I want to distort it or not. Now, as you can see, it's not long enough, so I'm going to go to Model, Polygroup, and select the polygroup and extrude it so I can connect that to the plate. And that plate goes on the wall. Just a simple torus to wrap around the area, the part that connects to the camera itself, just to detail it ever so slightly. And of course, you guys can spend good amount of time, add more bits and pieces, but I think just for a simple asset, that should get the job done. I'm duplicating what I already have, those screws, and scatter them around the back plate that goes on the wall. And using Xform, duplicate. You can alternatively hold down Alt and duplicate, since they are going to be identical, and instances, in case if you change a design, the other instances are going to follow. All right, naming is almost done. I'm going to bring that back into the position. Looks good. Now, with that out of the way, I'm just going to think about what sort of textures I want to give this to in Substance Painter. So there will be metal with few scratches. Not every single bit needs to be UV'd, so something to think about. Before I do that, I'm just going to add details because everything is super sharp and blocky. So I'm selecting edges through Model, Polygroup Edit, and give it bevel. I'm adding subdivisions, I'm looking at bevel distance, and I'm tweaking with round weights to make sure that they catch highlights. And I pretty much do that with every single bit. Selecting loops and going into Model, Polygroup Edit, Bevel to bevel the edges. Working on the main body as well. And for some of these, I need to tweak the settings ever so slightly. Go to round weight and change that so they catch light. Applying bevel to the corners and pretty much rinse and repeat. Okay, I'm kind of happy with the way that it turns out, the camera. So once we finish the detailing, we need to think about some very basic UVs. Again, there won't be heavy tileable textures on any of these guys, but I have an old habit of UV unwrapping everything, and we have some basic UVing tools to do so. It's one of those cases where if you feel like you need to do proper UV mapping, I would suggest using alternative DCCs. But what we have is fairly decent, especially with Auto UV setting method to X Atlas and increasing the iterations. I'm getting some really decent results right off the bat. So going with Auto UV for some of these bits and projection in some of them. So with this one, I'm using projection and using Auto Fit, and it's just incredible how easily you can UV unwrap one piece with just a simple projection. Ignoring the bits that we don't see on the camera, I'm just thinking about the way that I'm presenting it. Again, projection type to cylinder, Auto Fit, and taking it from there. And repeating the same thing, projection, and set the Auto Fit, and rotating the axis until I'm getting the result. With the base, pretty much doing the same thing, projection, Auto Fit, and you can see how simple and easy that is to UV unwrap. Again, some of the key tools are missing in UV mapping in Unreal Engine at the moment, but it's enough for conductive materials to have certain UVs. I'm going to UV layout through UV editor and getting the whole thing within 0 to 1. While you can use UDIMs, it's really not that necessary. Looking for anything that I need to rename, putting some final touches, fixing pivots, grouping them into one folder, and just, few bits and pieces that I need to put together before I export this to Substance Painter. Now once that's done, just to visualize things better, I'm just going to apply few materials just for to get the feel for what I'm going to do in Substance Painter. So for example, this LED light, maybe the glass for the lens, and this faceted edges gets under my skin. So I'm going to go to attribute and change its normal, so it's a smoother normal. And that's pretty much it. That's how you model a basic asset inside Unreal Engine. I hope you found this video useful and use these tools in your projects. If you're dealing with a simple prop, you really don't need to switch to another DCC for modeling. This will get the job done. Until the next video, see you guys later.